Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Diamond, in your April letter to shareholders, you called for a new Marshall Plan to ensure energy security for the United States and our European allies who are overly dependent on Russian energy. I couldn't agree more, which is why I'm so skeptical of ESG and the weaponization of financial regulation designed to discriminate against American energy companies. It's why I oppose the imposition of European-style climate stress tests on U.S. banks, requiring banks to hold more capital when lending to fossil energy or carbon-intensive firms, and the SEC's flawed climate disclosure rule, which would politicize capital allocation, redirect capital away from American energy firms, and steer retail investors into higher-fee, less diversified, and lower-return ESG investments. I commend you for recognizing in your letter that, quote, national security demands energy security for ourselves and our allies overseas, and for rejecting the demands of climate alarmists who have called on you to immediately cut off financing for fossil energy firms. But my specific question relates to coal, since coal still accounts for 22% of all electricity generation in the United States. And you write in your letter that, quote, using gas to diminish coal consumption is an actionable way to reduce CO2 emissions expeditiously. Mr. Diamond, do you believe that a coal company with a strong balance sheet, little or no debt, and a demonstrable track record of creditworthiness should have equal access to conventional bank financing as a natural gas company with similar financial characteristics?
Yes.
And will your institution commit to the continued financing of American coal producers who are still needed and will be for some time to supply the most affordable and reliable source of baseload power to the American economy?
We are working with the responsible coal producers and utility companies, many of whom, by the way, dramatically reducing the CO2 as we speak.
Mr. Moynihan, I'll spare you a similar questions, but as you and I have discussed, and notwithstanding your net zero commitment, I appreciate your focus that job number one is on addressing inflation. And to lower the rate of inflation, we cannot rely exclusively on Fed tightening. We must also address the supply side, and that means more, not less, financing of American energy exploration and production. And I urge all of the CEOs here to adopt a similarly measured approach to financing fossil energy. Mr. Moynihan, though, my question pertains to the FDIC's March request for information on the regulatory framework that applies to merger transactions involving one or more insured depository institutions. The FDIC's action signals a heightened regulatory resistance to bank mergers, presumably on the grounds that consolidation of the banking industry, which has significantly reduced the number of smaller banking organizations and increased the number of large and systemically important banking organizations, is a threat to financial stability. My question, Mr. Moynihan, is which of the following institutions is a more formidable competitor to Bank of America? Is it SunTrust operating alone? Is it BB&T operating alone? Or is it the combination of the two institutions now known as Truist?
Undoubtedly, the combination of two institutions is a more formidable competitor.
And Mr. Rogers, since I invoked the name of your institution, would you care to comment?
Well, I'm proud that Mr. Moynihan named me as a strong competitor to his business.
So I take it from the response of both of these gentlemen that an overly aggressive resistance to mergers by the FDIC could actually diminish competition at the GSIB level and therefore undermine financial stability. Final question to all of you, anyone who wants to chime in. Do you assess the impact of a CBDC as positive or negative for our economy and our credit markets? Specifically, how would a CBDC impact your deposit base and therefore your ability to deploy capital into the real economy? Mr. Diamond?
If it's properly done, it'll be fine. I don't trust it'll be properly done. You're not going to have the Federal Reserve running call centers. So there's a lot more to banking services than the actual token that moves the money. There are fraud, risk, alert, services, call centers, banks, branches, ATMs, CRA. So properly done is not a problem. Improperly done, you will have an issue.
Ms. Frazier, my remaining time, increased capital requirements. Vice Chair Barr suggests he wants to review this. What would that do to the ability of your customers to repair supply chains, your ability to deploy capital and fix inflation?
Given that we passed our stress test, which should be a test of whether we have sufficient capital, which is important for safety and stability, then the question becomes when you increase capital above that limit, then that can have a very detrimental effect on one's ability to lend right at the point when the capital markets are shutting down.
Thank you. I yield back.